Small things can make a big difference in your speaking score. So in this video, I'm going to show you 20 mistakes that could stop you from getting a band 7 plus in the IELTS speaking test and how to avoid them. But before we start, if you want to learn how to get a band 7 plus in every part of IELTS, make sure you check out our course in the description below. It's been created by a real IELTS examiner, so you'll learn what works and what doesn't work in the real test. All right, let's get into the lesson for today and let's look at mistake number 1. So the first mistake is giving short answers. For example, just one word or one sentence. This is a big problem because remember, it's your job to show the examiner how good your English is. If you don't say much, well, how can the examiner know how much vocabulary you know? How can they know how good your grammar is, what your pronunciation is like, and so on and so forth? So always make sure to expand your answers and give details. For example, you could talk about a reason. You could talk about an effect. You could give an example. So let's look at this question here. Do you work or are you a student? It's a pretty simple question, but a lot of students get it wrong. So here is an example of a short answer. I am a student. Well, this doesn't show the examiner any of your English at all. However, if you develop your answer and say something like this, it's going to be much better. So I'm a student currently undertaking my tertiary education at X university, which is located in ... I'm majoring in ... and ... So look at this developed answer. It's full of vocabulary and grammar, and it's really showing the examiner what your English is like. Now let's look at mistake number 2. The second mistake is always giving memorized answers. Now this is a big problem because examiners are taught and they're told not to assess memorized answers. So let's pretend you give a fantastic part 2 answer with some great vocabulary, some great grammar, but it's memorized. Well, the examiner won't be able to think about that when they're deciding your band score. Now, apart from that, it just makes you sound a little bit unnatural and it doesn't show that you are flexible with your English. And if you want a band 7 or higher, you need to show the examiner that you can be flexible with your English. Now, you might be thinking, what does flexible mean? Well, that means you're able to answer all question types and explain your ideas very nicely. Now, let's move on to mistake number 3. The third mistake is just using too many basic words like good, bad, or very. Now, this is a problem because if you want to get a band 7 or higher for vocabulary, you need to use some less common vocabulary. Also, it just makes your English sound very basic and not very professional. So now let me show you some examples of basic words and better words you can use instead. Let's start with the first word, which is good. Obviously, this is a very basic and common word. An alternative could be beneficial. For example, it's beneficial for society. This is much better than just saying it's good for society. Bad is also obviously another basic word. Well, instead of bad, you could use the word harmful. For example, smoking is harmful to health. Number 3, very. Well, instead of very, you could say incredibly. The policy was incredibly effective. So if you start using words like this, it's going to make your language sound much more professional. Let's look at mistake number 4 now, which is speaking too quickly or too slowly. Now, if you speak too fast, this can result in unclear pronunciation, so you'll be hard to understand, and sometimes your rhythm might not be clear, which again will make your pronunciation hard to understand. Conversely, on the other hand, if you speak too slowly, this is also a problem because for a band 5 in fluency, it says slow speech. So what should you do instead? How should you speak? Well, the first thing you need to do is speak at a normal speed. Not too fast, not too slow, just normal. The second thing you should be doing is using stress and not speaking in a monotone. So don't speak like this with no stress and no energy. You need to use some stress. You can't speak in just a monotone. The next thing is don't have too many pauses or hesitations. If you always have to stop and think about what word to use or words to use, well, this is going to reduce your fluency score. The next thing you should do is chunk words together. That means you need to put words that belong together together. So for example, if you say, I am hungry, you need to say this in one group. You wouldn't say, I am hungry. You've got to put them all together. And finally, you need to pronounce the sounds of English correctly, because if you don't, you're going to be hard to understand. All right, let's move on now to mistake number 5. The next mistake is using filler words like you know. This is a big problem because it can reduce your fluency score. It shows that you can't really explain yourself without having to stop and think all the time. And it shows you're not able to keep going and keep talking. Now, this is a problem that many students have. Even native speakers sometimes use a lot of filler words. So it's something that you have to train yourself not to do. So let me show you an example of what it looks like if I am using a lot of fillers. I think that, the policy is beneficial for the people in the country. It's something that should be done immediately. As you can see, that doesn't sound very professional and it does not sound like a native speaker. Let's move on to the next mistake, which is mistake number 6. So the next mistake is not answering the right question and going off topic. If you do this, it may suggest that you have a lower level of English, because most of the time when a native speaker gets asked a question, they answer that question and they don't start talking about something else. And so if you get a question that you're not sure about, just ask the examiner to repeat the question. This is completely normal and there's nothing wrong with it if done naturally. But obviously, if you do this with every question, it's going to suggest that you have a low level of English. All right, let's move on to mistake number 7. The next mistake is using the word you in your answers in part 3. This is an issue because you're not talking directly to the examiner or about their situation. You should be talking more in general. And when I say in general, I mean that you should be talking about most people rather than someone specific. Now, sometimes you may get a question which is about yourself, but most of the time you should be talking in general. So here is an example. Have a look at this question. How can governments reduce traffic problems in big cities? Now have a look at this answer. If you travel around, you often get stuck. Governments could invest in better public transport systems to encourage you to leave your car at home. So this is a problem for 2 main reasons. Like I mentioned before, you're not talking directly to the examiner. That's the first problem. And the second problem is you're missing out an opportunity to use higher level, more precise vocabulary. So let me show you what I mean. Look at the first you. Well, we could change that to commuters. A commuter is someone who travels to and from a place on a regular basis, normally to work or to school. So if you use the word commuter, you're showing the examiner you have a higher level of vocabulary and you're using the most precise, the best word in that situation. Let's look at the second you. Well, we could change that to they. Let's move on to the third you after encourage. Well, we could change that to motorists. A motorist is someone who drives a car. So again, we're showing the examiner we have a higher level of vocabulary because you and your, they're just too easy. They're very general words, and lower level students use them all the time, but higher level students do not. And for that last your, we could change that to their. All right, let's move on to mistake number 8. The next mistake, which is a really common one, is just incorrect pronunciation and pronouncing English sounds incorrectly. Now, this is obviously going to affect your pronunciation score, and then of course that could lower your speaking band score. It also just makes you harder to understand, so the examiner is going to find it more difficult to listen to your grammar and your vocabulary and your ideas. So, to improve your pronunciation, I really recommend that you learn the International Phonetic Alphabet, which you can see on the screen right now. This alphabet contains all of the sounds of English. And if you know all of these sounds and you know how to pronounce them, you're going to have really clear pronunciation and you're going to be able to pronounce every word in English correctly. All right, let's move on to mistake number 9. The next mistake is just pausing for too long before answering a question, or just sitting there when you get a question and not saying anything like this. Well, that's not natural, and it suggests that you're trying to understand the question and think of words, and this could reduce your fluency score because it shows that you can't express yourself. So don't just sit there. You need to say something. It's completely normal to ask the examiner, can you repeat the question? That is completely normal, and it's not going to reduce your score if done naturally. Let's move on to the next mistake, which is number 10. The next one is also a very common one that I see all the time, and it's making basic grammar mistakes with your tenses. This suggests that you're not a band 7 or higher for grammar because a higher level student would not make basic grammar mistakes like this. So always think about this and be careful to think about the question. So is the question talking about the past? Is it talking about the present? Is it talking about the future? Let me show you a quick example. So if you look at this question, it says when you were a child, so that's past tense. Did you, again, past tense, have a lot of toys? Now let's have a look at an answer that would be something like a lower level student would say. So yes, when I was much younger, my mother gave me many toys. Well, that's incorrect because we're talking about the past. So that should be gave, okay? Gave me many toys. My favorite toy is the Lego set. Well, we're not talking about right now. We're talking about the past. So that should be was the Lego set. Which I still having today? Well, no, that's incorrect grammar as well. We're not using the correct verb pattern. So that would need to be I still have today. I also remember that I have a PlayStation at that time. So we're saying at that time is talking about the past. So we need to say had, okay? We need to change have to had because had is past tense. And finally, it is very fun to play with. Well, no, we're not talking about now. No, we're talking about the past. So we need to say it was very fun to play with. So remember, always think about your tenses and ask yourself, am I talking about the past, the present, or the future? Let's move on to mistake number 11. Mistake number 11 is not expanding your ideas with reasons or examples. Remember, this is a speaking test. So if you say something, you should always give more information. Remember, it's your job to show the examiner how good your English is. So if you do expand and give reasons and examples, This is going to show the examiner that you can explain yourself. And this is really important, especially in part 3, where it's a discussion between you and the examiner. So the examiner is going to ask you what you think about certain topics and certain ideas. And to get a high speaking score, you need to explain yourself and your reasons instead of just saying your opinion and then stopping and not saying anything else. Let's move on to the next mistake, which is mistake 12. So the next mistake is repeating the same vocabulary and phrases again and again and again. This shows the examiner that you probably don't have a wide range of vocabulary. You probably have a more limited or a smaller range of vocabulary if you always repeat the same vocabulary. And if you do have a small range of vocabulary, well, that means a lower band for lexical resource. So what should you do? Well, try using synonyms or paraphrasing where necessary. Now, in regards to synonyms, please don't use synonyms unless you know how to use them correctly, because if you just use a lot of synonyms, but you're not using them correctly, well, this could actually reduce your lexical resource band score. So yeah, always try to vary your vocabulary instead of using the same words again and again. Let me give you some examples. So let's have a look at this first one, very bad. Well, an alternative could be horrendous. The traffic is horrendous in my country, but a lot of people would just say the traffic is very bad in my country. Driver, well, an alternative could be motorist. Motorists get very frustrated. Easy, well, instead of saying easy, you could say straightforward. It's a very straightforward process. Let's move on to mistake 13, which is sounding very robotic and not using intonation and not using stress and not using rhythm. These are very important parts of sounding natural with your English pronunciation. But if you just speak in a monotone, well, you're going to sound very unnatural and you're probably going to get a band 4 or a 5 for your pronunciation. So you should always put some energy and some emotion into your speech and listen to native speakers and see how they use stress and intonation. Always remember, don't speak in a monotone. So for example, my name is Shane and I am from Australia. You need to put some stress and some energy into your speech. Let's move on to mistake number 14. The next one is using extremely formal language. I'm going to show you an example in just a second, but this is a problem because it's going to make your speech sound very unnatural and maybe also a bit weird. And also the examiner might not understand you if you use very, very, very formal words that you've just found in a dictionary, for example. Because I have seen students use really random words from a dictionary that native speakers don't actually use. So always be careful of that. Now, let me show you an example of a natural answer versus a very formal answer. Look at this question. Do you like listening to music? Pretty simple question, right? Let's look at the formal answer first. Indeed, I derive immense auditory gratification from indulging in melodic compositions, I'm not going to read the rest, but as you can see, this language is very formal and it's not natural. And it's something that 99.99% of native speakers would never use or say. Let's have a look at a more natural answer now. Yes, I do, as it helps me unwind after a long day. I usually listen to a mix of genres, but I especially like songs with lyrics that have some deeper meaning behind them, rather than just superficial stuff. This answer is much more natural and something that a real human native speaker would say. Now note here that we have still used some higher level vocabulary. For example, unwind, genre, lyrics, superficial. So I'm not saying not to use higher level vocabulary. I'm just saying not to make your answers extremely formal and extremely unnatural. All right, let's move on to mistake number 15 now, which is mispronouncing ED endings. This is obviously related to pronunciation, and this is a big problem because it's going to make your pronunciation sound not clear, and it's also going to make it harder for the examiner to understand what you're saying. And because of this, it may also affect your grammar and vocabulary score because the examiner can't hear if you're using ED or not. And obviously, this is a big part of vocabulary and grammar because you need to use the right words and the right tenses. So let me quickly give you some examples of words that end in ED and how to pronounce them. So the first thing that you should know is that there are 3 different ways we can pronounce the ED endings in English. The first one is with a T sound, a T sound. The second one is with a D sound, D. And the third one is with an ED sound, ed. Let me show you some examples. Talked, talked. Watched, watched. Crushed, crushed. So you can hear with all of these words that ED is simply pronounced as a T sound, a T sound. Now look at this word, open. Would we say opened? No, we'd say opened, opened. That ED is simply pronounced as a D. Next one, closed, closed. Okay, there's a D sound at the end. And last one, begged, begged. We wouldn't say begged, begged. No, okay, begged. And let's look at the last column now. Needed, needed. So we've got an ud sound at the end, needed. Wanted, wanted, same thing. And then created, created. So make sure you learn your ED endings. It's going to make your pronunciation sound much more clear. All right, let's move on to mistake number 16 now. So this next mistake is not organizing your answers well and just speaking without any structure or without any plan. Now, this can make it harder for the examiner to follow your answers, and this might be a problem and reduce your fluency band score if you're not using any cohesive devices and discourse markers. If you don't know, a discourse marker is something like what I mean is, or in conclusion. So when you're speaking, you should try to follow a structure or a plan. So for example, let's pretend you get this question right here. Do the benefits of technology outweigh any potential negative sides? So this is a question about your opinion. You need to say what you think. Well, if you get a question about an opinion, you can follow this structure. Firstly, you can give your opinion. Then you can give a reason for your opinion, then develop or give more information. And then if you want to speak for even longer, you can give a second main idea and develop that as well. So let me show you a quick example now. So from my experience as a young adult, I strongly argue that the advantages of technology outnumber any downsides. So this is clearly stating the opinion. The speaker is making it very clear what they think. Now let's give a reason. One primary reason is the immense improvement in communication that technology brings. Well, this is our main idea. And then finally, we can develop that and support our answer. Take, for example, modern technologies like smartphones and the internet. They have enabled instant communication across the globe. This has ... Let's move on to the next mistake now, which is 17. The next mistake is not paraphrasing if you don't know a word. Now, this is completely normal to sometimes forget a word, and maybe you just don't know the specific word for what you're trying to explain. That's fine, not the end of the world. But if this happens, you should try to paraphrase it. And what I mean by that is you need to explain it in a different way. So just pretend you forget the word helicopter. Well, you could describe it by saying something like a flying machine with blades which spin overhead. And this is actually part of getting a band 7 for your vocabulary. You need to paraphrase where required. That's what it says in the official band descriptors for lexical resource. Let's move on to the next mistake now, which is mistake 18. The next mistake is speaking in very long sentences without having any breaks. And I understand that this might happen because a student might be nervous, and sometimes when you're nervous, you speak very quickly, much more quickly than normal. But this can really make your speaking harder to understand and harder to follow. So what you should do is you should try to train yourself to take a very short pause between sentences and then go to the next sentence. Or alternatively, you can use a discourse marker or a linking word. So for example, if you want to say something that's different from what you just said before, well, you could say something like on the other hand, or conversely, and then continue. If you want to explain yourself, you could say, what I mean is, ... and then you explain what you're trying to say. Now, on the screen right now, you can see an example of a very long sentence. I'm not going to read it, but as you can see, it's very long and it's joined with many ands. The speaker uses about 6 ands to join everything together. So let's have a look at a more natural way to say that and a more easier to understand way. So I enjoy living in my hometown because it's a really friendly place with great weather. Fantastic, very clear. There are lots of restaurants I like to visit with my friends, and the food is both cheap and tasty. Overall, it's a fun and comfortable place. So if you look at this one here, on the right, it's much easier to follow than the one on the left, which keeps saying and with no breaks. Let's move on now to mistake number 19, which is a very common one that I see all the time. It's not using a variety of grammar structures. And this is a problem because if you just use the, basic present tense and past tense, well, this can limit your grammar score and keep you at a 5 or a 6 for grammar. So instead, you need to try using different structures. For example, try using conditionals, try using relative clauses, try using the passive voice, try using by plus verb ing. Let's move on to the next mistake, mistake number 20. The next mistake is always using and to join every single sentence. This is very common, particularly among lower level speakers, and this can reduce or lower your fluency because it shows the examiner you cannot link your ideas very well or connect your ideas very well. So instead, try using discourse markers and linking words, which we talked about just before. And also try using cohesive devices like referencing. So that means using this or that. You can also use substitution. So that simply means using a different word from what you used before. So if we go back to that example we looked at before, this answer here, or this example here, has 6 ands. And this does not show a higher level of English. However, let's make it much easier to understand and give it a better flow. So we could say, I like living in my hometown because it's very nice, comma, the people are friendly, comma, or pause, and the weather is good. So you can see there we've used one and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with using and. The problem is if you use it for every sentence. There are many restaurants that I often go to with my friends, which is always fun. So now we have used some relative pronouns, that and which. And then finally, as for the food, it's delicious. So as for is a great little phrase you can use when you want to talk about a specific topic. So you can see there that obviously the one on the right is much easier to listen to, and it's just a higher level of English. Now, please note that this is not an example of a band 7 answer. No, that's not right at all. I'm just trying to show you how you can make sentences flow much better without always using and to join every one of them. So I'm not saying you should never use and, but I'm just saying you shouldn't overuse it and you shouldn't use it to join every sentence. So they were 20 mistakes for IELTS speaking. If you want to learn 9 tips for a band 9 in IELTS speaking, check out this video right here. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the lesson. Take care and see you next time.